High up on that granite wall, the sun beats down hard, casting long shadows over a man hanging 2,000 feet in the air. He takes a deep breath for the first time in 3 long days, staring down at the valley floor where life hums along quiet. There is a silence up here that feels heavy and final, a stillness that comes right before the storm breaks and the world shatters. The climb is finished and the summit is reached, but a tangled haul bag demands one last routine rappel before he can go home. His hands move with the memory of 1,000 climbs, adjusting the gear and ropes without a single thought of the darkness waiting ahead. It only takes 60 short seconds to turn a simple chore into a tragedy that will echo across the entire world for years to come. Hundreds of strangers peer through screens watching him live, including a young girl in Anchorage who has no idea she is seeing her brother fade. The news wires lit up with lies about a social media star chasing fame, painting a picture of a fool who died for likes. But that boy was no influencer chasing clicks. He was a ghost of the old school, a master of the ice and the stone. We are digging past the headlines to find the cold, hard truth about a life lived on the razor edge of the impossible drop. Born in the frozen heart of Anchorage, he learned to walk where the wind howls and the snow piles deeper than a man stands tall. Before he could ride a bike, he was gripping wet shale by the highway, his father watching close as he learned the way of rock. While other boys played their games inside, he sat alone in the snow, staring at peaks that whispered secrets only he could truly hear. He followed his brother up the steep white slopes, 2 shadows moving in perfect rhythm against the vast and unforgiving canvas of the wild. In the bitter cold of Valdez, where the air freezes in your lungs, he found his calling on waterfalls frozen into pillars of blue glass. You have to trust the steel spikes on your feet and the swing of your axe when the ice shatters like crystal underneath you. He moved through the storm with a grace that terrified most men, finding comfort in the brutal bite of the wind and the ice. He traded a normal life for a silver car and the open road, packing his whole world into a trunk filled with climbing rope. He worked the dark waters on fishing boats, pulling heavy nets through freezing spray just to earn enough coin to vanish into the mountains again. There is a strange joy in the suffering up there, a freedom found only when the snow bites your face and the wind screams loud. He had a ritual before the battle started, dipping his rough hands into silver dust like he was painting himself for a holy war. He wore that glitter like armor against the gale, staring down the storm with a fire that burned hotter than the freezing cold wind. He hung by his fingertips on the granite wall without a rope to catch him, defying the gravity that pulls every man down eventually. The sky turned dark as pitch and the wind began to scream, leaving him exposed on a ledge where one slip meant the end. You could see the change in his eyes as he tightened his straps, becoming sharp and lethal like the ice axes in his hands. He climbed pillars of frozen water that looked like chandeliers made of glass, hooking delicate ice that could shatter into 1,000 deadly pieces. For 37 long years, that wall of ice stood untouched by human hands, waiting for a ghost to come and claim its soul. He moved up the vertical face without a partner to watch his back, trusting only his own skill to keep him from the void. Standing on the spine of the world, he looked out over the clouds with the quiet pride of a man who conquered the impossible. On Mount Hunter, he fought through spindrift avalanches that poured like rivers, jamming his steel tools into cracks where the rock met the ice. Then, he set his sights on the big one, a 9,000-foot wall on Denali that rises straight up into the thin air. It is a brutal mix of stone and ice that demands everything a man has to give, stripping him down to his bare bones. In the old days, it took teams of men weeks to haul their gear up that face, fighting the mountain inch by bloody inch. He sat alone on a hanging glacier, watching the sun fade away, sipping warm water while his legs dangled over a mile of nothing. He climbed through the twilight for 22 hours straight, a machine made of flesh and blood, moving relentlessly upward through the freezing dark. He squeezed himself into narrow chimneys of blue ice, scraping his way toward the sky while the mountain tried its best to crush him. When he fell to his knees on the summit ridge, the sun blinded him, and the wind whipped the victory right out of him. Ice crusted over his face like a mask of death, but underneath that frozen shell beat the heart of a true king of winter. Back on the ground, he curled up in the back of a frosted silver car, sleeping soundly while the rest of the world rushed. He steered that little car south toward the tall pines of Yosemite, leaving the snow behind for the golden granite of the valley floor. He stood at the base of that monster rock, with enough heavy iron on his hips to anchor a battleship against the rising tide. Staring up 3,000 feet of vertical stone makes a man feel smaller than a single grain of sand lost in a hurricane. He stepped high in his nylon ladders, placing tiny metal hooks on edges of granite that were no thicker than a shiny new dime. He made his home on a hanging cot suspended over the empty air, watching the world turn while his feet dangled in nothingness. Down in the meadow, a stranger set up a long glass eye, looking for something to watch high on the gray wall above. He pointed a phone at the lens and started broadcasting a signal, turning a private struggle into a cheap show for the masses. The hearts and comments started flying in like sparks from a fire, feeding a hunger for spectacle that can never truly be filled. Up on his ledge, the boy watched the sun go down in silence, never knowing he was being watched by 1,000 eyes. He pulled his weary body over the final lip of stone, collapsing in the dust with the heavy weight of the climb gone. The screens lit up with cheers from people who did not know him, celebrating a victory that felt like their own cheap prize. But the mountain always has one last trick to play, and his heavy bag of gear caught fast on a jagged rock flake. He looked at the mess of ropes and metal at his waist, his tired mind trying to work the puzzle of the haul. He threaded the rope through the metal brake, preparing to slide down into the shadows one last time to free his stuck burden. The end of that rope danced in the wind just a few fatal feet above the ledge he was trying so hard to reach. The curve of the rock hid the danger from his eyes, so he leaned back into his harness with a trust that kills. He slid down the line, smooth and fast, the wind rushing past his ears as he dropped toward the snag in the stone. In the blink of an eye, the rope ran out, slipping through the metal gate with a sharp sound like a snapping bone. He fell backward into the vast open sky, a tiny speck of orange tumbling down toward the dark trees waiting far below him. The man in the meadow jumped back from his glass in pure horror, his hands flying up to cover eyes that saw too much. The digital crowd turned from joy to panic in a heartbeat, scrolling text, screaming out questions that would never find a good answer. The man in the meadow fumbled with his glass eye, desperate to kill the signal that was beaming death to the whole wide world. But the signal was already out there in the ether, multiplying like a virus on a million glowing screens in the cold, dark void. The papers ran with ink that screamed lies about a star who died for fame, turning a quiet soul into a cheap carnival act. People sat in warm shops, sipping their coffee and shaking their heads at the fool on the screen, judging a man they never knew. The story splashed across every channel, a cautionary tale built on falsehoods that washed over his legacy like rain on a dirty window pane. The man with a telescope tried to set the record straight, standing in the woods with a heavy heart and a shaky voice recording. But the truth is, a quiet candle in a hurricane, easily drowned out by the neon glare of a lie that sells more papers. His spirit faded into the wind while the world picked over his bones, leaving nothing behind but the gear and a name stained black. Then you have the ones who really do play with fire, hanging off red rocks with a camera stick just to catch a thrill. They pose like heroes for flying machines in the desert sun, feeding the beast that demands more danger for every single scrap of attention. They title their clips with promises of death and falling, baiting the hook for anyone hungry enough to watch a man risk it all. He hangs by one hand and checks his phone with the other, treating the abyss like it is nothing more than a stage prop. He sits in a padded room and tells you straight that it is all for the coin, a hustle built on the edge of doom. The machine learns what makes your heart race, pushing the line higher and higher, until the danger becomes the only currency that matters anymore. Even the pros get caught in the trap, training in safe gyms while the numbers on the screen tell them they need to bleed. He stood at the foot of that jagged European peak with gear that still smelled like the shop, a stranger in a lethal land. The night before the climb, he sat on a hotel bed, asking the internet how to use the steel spikes that would save him. He stumbled through the snow with a pack heavy enough to break a mule, fighting gravity and his own lack of knowing the way. Rocks clattered down the chute as he scrambled without a rope, the camera shaking in his hand like a leaf in a winter gale. He looked into the lens later and admitted he went too far. A rare moment of truth in a game built on smoke and mirrors. One man stands safe in the warm glow of his gold, while the other fades into the blue storm like a ghost lost to time. Then there is the fool who steps onto the ice in street clothes, snapping pictures of himself while the reaper waits patiently at his heels. A child watches the screen and thinks it looks easy, trying to walk the edge before he even knows how far the fall really is. They ignore the years of sweat and study it takes to survive, trading a lifetime of mastery for a video that lasts 5 seconds. He moved alone through the high, thin air, leaving no trace but his footprints on the spine of the world where the silence is absolute. He hauled himself over the lip of the abyss, planting his flag in a place where the earth touches the sky and the wind rules. While he sat reading his book in peace, a glass eye watched him from miles away, stealing his quiet moments without asking for his leave. In a kitchen far away, a phone clattered to the floor as a sister watched the light go out of her world in real time. The digital crowd rushed in to wrap his memory in red tape, covering up his glory with warnings that he never needed nor asked for. The mountain he conquered was buried deep under a landslide of cheap headlines and noise, hiding the majesty of what he actually went and done. He was just a kid sitting on the back of his silver car, drinking coffee and watching the glaciers calve into the gray northern sea. He climbed to feel the spirit of the wild run through his veins, standing with arms wide open to catch the breath of the sky. Every turn of the steel screw into the ice was a prayer to the mountain, a promise that he belonged to the cold and the vertical. The great white peak burns with the last light of the day, standing silent and eternal long after the stories of men have faded away. We light a candle for the boy who flew too close to the sun, remembering the fire in his soul before the darkness took him. You would not walk into a blizzard without a coat, so do not wander the digital wilds without a shield to keep the wolves away. That red line traces a path straight up the gut of the beast, 9,000 feet of vertical hell that would break a lesser man. Back in the day, hard men in wool huddled over paper maps, plotting a siege against the ice with nothing but grit and heavy iron. Up in the death zone, your mind starts to drift like snow, thoughts scattering in the wind until all that is left is the next step. He made his bed on a block of ice hanging over the void, sleeping soundly while the stars spun slowly over the roof of the world. The wind up there cuts through you like a knife, whipping the snow into a frenzy that blinds a man to the drop on either side. He placed tiny metal hooks on flakes of stone so thin they would snap under the weight of a whisper if you breathed too heavy. Fighting with that hanging tent in the gale felt like wrestling a wild animal while hanging by a thread over the endless gray valley floor. The sun drags shadows across the granite face, marking the passing of days while he inches up that stone wall like a slow, stubborn beetle. Down in the green meadow, the crowds point their fingers, never knowing that the speck above them is fighting a war against gravity and stone. Plastic holds in a safe, warm gym can never teach you the fear that comes when the rock is cold and the protection is miles away. The screen fills up with angry words and doubt, burying the sweat and the struggle under a pile of cheap noise from people who cannot climb. Anger flows like a dark river through the wires, turning every drop of hate into gold for the ones who know how to sell the fear. A shaking hand holds the lens steady on the fall, capturing the moment a life ends just to feed the hunger of the watching crowd. In the quiet room, the expert holds the rope, showing us the simple knot that could have saved a boy from the long drop down. The rope stopped just 10 feet short of salvation, a tiny distance that might as well have been 1,000,000 miles of empty air. If he had tied a simple knot in the end of that line, he would be walking the earth today instead of sleeping in it. Your mind plays tricks when the summit is behind you, letting your guard down just when the mountain is ready to take its toll. The forest holds the names of the fallen on weathered wood, a quiet roll call of the ones who flew too close to the sun. The rescue birds come too late for anything, but the sorrowful duty of carrying a broken body back to the world of the living. Candles flicker in the northern twilight as friends gather in the snow, trying to warm the cold, empty space he left behind in their hearts. Grief is a heavy stone that sits on your chest, pressing down hard until it feels like you might never draw a breath again. That silver car sits abandoned under a shroud of winter snow, waiting for a driver who is never going to turn the key again. His battered helmet and colorful gear sit silent on the table, artifacts of a life lived loud and fast on the edge of the world. He fades into the digital ether like a ghost in the machine, leaving behind a story that the world got wrong from the start. Welcome to the sharp end of the rope, where the wind bites deep, and the only law that matters is the law of gravity. Watch him move like water over the blue ice, a master at work in a cathedral built of frozen tears and cold, hard stone. He built his strength in the shadows of a dusty cabin, pulling himself up until his muscles burned hot enough to melt the winter snow. Every piece of metal on his rack was a prayer for safety, scratched and worn from years of grinding against the unforgiving granite walls. Seasons changed around his little metal home, turning the leaves to gold and then to white, while he lived for nothing but the next climb. Soloing is like walking off a plank over a dark ocean, trusting that you can learn to swim before the black water swallows you whole. A hot meal cooked on a tailgate tastes better than a feast when you have earned it with blood and sweat in the freezing cold. You have to trust a sliver of rubber to hold your weight against the stone, fighting the urge to shake when the fear creeps in. The steel pick bites into the ice with a solid thud, a violent connection that holds a man steady against the pull of the void. Standing on the knife edge under a full moon, he looked like a spirit walking the line between this world and the one beyond. He spent hours sharpening the steel points of his crampons, knowing that dull metal on hard ice is a recipe for a long fall. Turning snow into water takes patience and fuel. Watching the blue flame roar while the white chunks melt slowly into something you can drink. Out in the whiteout, he hunched over his radio, trying to send a signal through the storm to let someone know he was alive. Waking up to frozen boots is a special kind of hell, hammering the stiff plastic just to force your cold feet inside the shell. Walking a thin metal ladder over a bottomless blue crack will test your nerve in ways that no gym wall ever could hope to. The beam of his light cut a lonely path through the dark, marking the only way forward in a world swallowed by the night. He stood still and watched the mountain shed its skin, a massive cloud of white powder thundering down the valley with a silent roar. You check your knot a dozen times because a simple figure eight is the only thing keeping you from becoming a memory on the rocks. Reading a map in a gale is a fight against the wind, trying to find your place on paper while the world blows away. He painted his face with white paste to hide from the sun, looking like a ghost haunting the high places where the air is thin. Sliding down the rope feels like flying for a second, but you never forget that gravity is always waiting to pull you down hard. Water freezes solid in your bottle before you can drink it, forcing you to fight for every single drop of hydration in the cold. Time moves different up here in the thin air, marked only by the glowing numbers on a watch face covered in fresh falling snow. His hands were wrecked and raw from the stone, wrapped in tape just to hold them together for one more day on the wall. Navigating the broken ice is like walking through a frozen maze where the walls are moving and the floor might open up at any moment. He slept on a ledge no wider than a church pew, anchored to the stone, while the universe spun slowly overhead in the dark. Back in the car, he dried his socks on the heater vents, living the simple life of a man who needs nothing but the climb. That hollow screw bites into the ice with a scream, boring a hole that holds your life secure against the pull of the void. Huddled in a hole dug from the snow, he traced his finger over the paper map, planning the next move in a dangerous game. Opening the tent door in the morning brings a blinding light and a view that most men will never see in 100 lifetimes. The stove roars like a jet engine in the vestibule, melting snow into water so he can live to fight for one more day. He snaps the steel bail of his crampon onto the boot heel, locking himself into the mountain with a satisfying click of cold metal. Walking that knife-edge ridge feels like balancing on the spine of a sleeping dragon, with the abyss waiting hungry on both sides. He forces down cold food with a plastic spoon, fueling the engine even when his stomach turns and his body begs for rest. Those saucer clouds stacking up over the summit are a warning written in the sky, telling him that a big storm is coming fast. He throws the green rope out into the empty air, watching it uncurl like a snake seeking a path down the sheer rock face. Shivering in the dark, he blows hot breath into his frozen hands, trying to coax a little life back into his numb fingers. He racks his gear with the care of a surgeon, knowing that fumbling for a clip in the crux is a mistake he cannot afford. That little orange tent glows warm in the vast blue night, a fragile bubble of life holding out against the crushing weight of winter. Dragging a sled uphill through deep powder is a misery that burns the legs and tests the will of even the strongest men. When you slip on the steep snow, you have a split second to flip over and drive that axe deep before you slide away forever. He kicks his front points into the vertical ice with a violence that shatters the surface, trusting the steel to hold his weight. Cutting blocks from the hard snow to build a wall against the wind is the only way to keep his tent from shredding apart. He builds an anchor in the ice that could hold a truck, equalizing the load so he can sleep sound without fear of falling. Strapping those gaiters over his boots is a wrestling match, with stiff fabric and frozen Velcro, sealing out the snow for the long haul. The walk through the silent pine forest is a peaceful prelude to the violence waiting for him high up on the jagged peaks above. Sitting on a ledge all night without a tent forces a man to shiver just to keep the blood moving in his veins. He checks the tip of his tool like a warrior checking a blade, knowing that dull metal will bounce off the hard ice. He pulls a frozen mask up over his face to hide from the wind that wants to strip the skin right off his bones. Standing on the roof of the world, he looks out at a horizon of jagged teeth, feeling the silence of the high, thin air. Jumping across a bottomless crack in the ice takes a leap of faith that most folks will never ever have to summon up. He wrote his thoughts down in a frozen little book, shivering in the yellow light while the wind tried to tear his shelter apart. You crawl out of the tent into the pitch-black night, guided only by a single beam of light and a prayer for luck. Shouldering a pack that heavy feels like carrying the weight of the whole world on your back while you trudge through the deep snow. Even eating is a battle when your food is frozen solid and your hands are too cold to squeeze the life out of it. He coiled that stiff frozen rope with a patience born of necessity, treating the lifeline with the respect that it is surely due. The sun up here will burn your eyes blind if you do not cover them behind a shield of dark and mirrored glass. He hammered that metal stake deep into the snow, building an anchor that might be the only thing keeping him on the hill. When your gear starts to fail, you patch it up with tape and grit, keeping the feathers inside where they can keep you warm. In the whiteout, you have to trust the needle in your hand, because your eyes will lie to you about which way is up. The mountain tries to bury you alive with rivers of sliding snow, forcing you to fight just to stay on top of the surface. He jammed a wedge of metal into the rock crack, testing it with a tug to make sure it would catch a sudden fall. Crossing the blue ice field feels like walking on the moon, a lonely journey across a landscape that does not care if you live. Looking down between your boots at a mile of empty air will spin your head if you do not keep your eyes on the rock. The cold creeps into your bones at night, making you shake so hard that you wonder if you will ever feel warm again. Every step in the deep snow is a battle against exhaustion, sinking down to your hip and pulling yourself out just to do it again. You pull the hood tight until your world is nothing but a tunnel of fur, hiding your face from the stinging bite of the gale. He balanced on a point of rock sharp enough to cut the sky, standing alone on an island in a sea of jagged peaks. Sometimes you just have to lean against the wall and let the fatigue wash over you before you can summon the strength to move. The day ends, but the work is never done. coiling the line as the purple twilight settles over the frozen roof of the world. He watches his black gloves spin away into the white void, a stark reminder that gravity is waiting to take what you let slip. Pouring that red powder into the water looks like blood hitting the snow, a vivid splash of color in a world of stark white. Tying a knot with a frozen rope is like wrestling a steel cable, demanding every ounce of strength your tired hands can muster up. Steel sparks fly when the pick scrapes against the granite, a violent clash of metal and stone in the search for a solid hold. The first light of dawn hits him like a physical blow, turning the frozen world to gold and thawing the frost on his suit. You have to breathe life into the metal to make it work, melting the ice that seals the gate shut with your own warm breath. Moving through the storm at night is hypnotic, watching the snowflakes rush into the beam of light like stars engaging a warp speed drive. When the water runs dry, you eat the mountain itself, packing cold snow into your mouth just to keep the thirst from taking over. Looking back at a single line of tracks in the snow makes a man realize just how small he really is in this land. He brushes the rime ice off the metal marker, a quiet handshake with the summit after a long and brutal fight to get there. He tosses the rule book over the edge with a laugh, filming the drop for an audience that cares more about the stunt than his life. A thumb scrolls past the danger on a cracked screen. Consuming the risk of others like it is nothing more than a cheap drug. One loose strap is all it takes to send steel sliding down the ice, marking the start of a fall that never really ends. He hangs off the red rock for the camera, grinning like he owns the place while the ground waits patiently for him to slip. The mountain is buried under a graph of rising numbers, turning the majesty of the peak into just another set of data points. Sitting in a hotel room asking the internet how to survive the ice is a sure sign that you have no business being there. He staggers under a pack filled with glass and plastic, carrying the weight of his ego instead of the tools he needs to live. The rock crumbles under his hands like rotten wood, sending a shower of stone down the face while panic starts to grip his chest. He fumbles for a grip but saves the camera first, choosing the shot over his safety in a moment of pure digital madness. Sitting in the dark, he offers a heavy sigh to the lens, realizing too late that the mountain does not care about his regrets. One man counts his coins in the warm light, while the other fades into the blue storm like a memory lost to time. He points a finger at that neon sign, promising death, treating the end of a life like it is just a cheap game. Even the strong ones get crushed by the weight of numbers, sweating in a gym while the digital graph demands more of them. The machine stamps out viral moments on an assembly line, shattering the glass screens just to feed the hunger of the dark void. He sat quiet on the ridge, watching the morning sun paint the snow, needing no camera to validate the beating of his heart. Ignoring the rules written in the book will send you sliding down the ice, arms flailing as the gray sky swallows you whole. A thumb scrolls past the tragedy without a second thought, consuming the pain of others like it is nothing more than cheap candy. He jammed his hand into the stone crack and pulled himself up, finding purchase in the rock where a lesser man would fall. Rain drums on the roof of his little metal home, washing away the view of the gray ocean while the memories hold tight. From the summit, he looks like a speck of dust against the blue, standing humble before a world that does not know him. The phone lands face up in the deep powder, displaying hearts for a second before the snow melts and the screen goes black. Huddled in a cave carved from the ice, he melts snow over a single candle flame, fighting the cold with a tiny fire. The man packs away his glass eye with heavy hands, wishing he could unsee the moment gravity took its final and terrible toll. He fakes a slip for the camera and laughs it off, pretending the edge is a joke while the real danger waits below. When your glove tears, you stitch it up with floss and patience, relying on your own two hands to keep the frost at bay. Lights move slowly up the dark wall under the moon, fireflies searching for a way up the stone while the valley sleeps below. He stares at the weather map and breathes a heavy sigh, knowing he dodged a bullet that was aimed right at his heart. Pressing a hot mug against a frozen cheek is the only comfort you get when the world outside is nothing but white noise. His name glows gold on the timeline for a heartbeat before it gets buried under a landslide of new ads and useless noise. We place a stone on the pile and let the flag snap in the wind, a silent prayer for the ones who climb. The metal hook catches a tiny edge of crystal, holding fast against the stone while the dust motes dance in the cold light. He took a picture of the horizon instead of his own face, capturing the soul of the place rather than his own vanity. One falls on a soft mat and laughs, while the other hangs grimly in the storm, fighting for every single breath of air. He paints his face with glitter one last time, a warrior preparing to descend back to a world that will never understand him. The little silver car drives off into the purple twilight, leaving a trail of dust as it chases the spirit of the wild. He walks into the white mist until he is gone, leaving footprints that the wind will fill long before the morning sun rises. Keep your digital life as secure as your anchor lines by using a shield that hides you from the prying eyes of wolves. Connect to the world with a single tap of your finger, staying safe while you travel through the invisible wires of the web. The storm clouds roll in dark and heavy, marking the end of a tale about the edge, where life meets the cold void. His gear lies silent on the rock as the light fades, the tools of a master resting now that the work is done. A snowflake lands on the black screen and melts away, a reminder that everything digital is fleeting compared to the cold, hard mountains. Zip up the tent tight and listen to the silence, because out here on the edge, the only thing that matters is survival.